High upon the slopes of Olympus, where the mist clings like a second skin to the grey shoulders of stone, the mountain hums with a voice older than cities, older than kings, older than the memory of humankind. Shepherds, who wander its lower pastures, say that if one listens carefully in the stillness before dawn, the rocks themselves murmur, carrying fragments of names that echo and dissolve before they can be grasped. Those whispers are not merely the breath of wind weaving through pine and laurel. They are the echoes of the gods, who themselves are never fixed, who shift like clouds across centuries, carrying new epithets, fresh guises, and veiled masks depending on the valley, the city, or the season of prayer. To approach Olympus is not only to climb a mountain of stone, but also to ascend into the fluidity of divine memory, where each god might be many, and every name may conceal another face. From afar, Olympus is not unlike any great peak, snow-wreathed, shining beneath the sun by day, and darkening into violet and shadow at dusk. Yet those who dwell beneath it know it as more than landscape. It is a threshold between human breath and immortal presence. The ancients believed that the summit could not be reached, for those who dared climb beyond the high ridges never returned, or if they did, they spoke in riddles, their eyes clouded as though reflecting a sky no mortal should see. To stand beneath its crown is to stand beneath a temple without walls, a sanctuary fashioned by the hand of nature, yet consecrated by countless myths. Here, stories gather like mist, twisting through centuries until they condense into memory. Some tell of Zeus enthroned, his thunder shaking the roots of the mountain. Others whisper that Hera, in forms more ancient than her golden diadem, once lingered in sacred groves at its base. Still others claim that before the Olympians, nameless presences haunted its ravines, older even than the Titans. Each tale, each epithet, becomes a thread woven into the living shroud of Olympus. In the hush of twilight, when shepherds lead their flocks to fold, and the light fades into the grey-blue mantle of approaching night, one can almost hear the faintest sighs of those old stories. They are not shouted nor proclaimed in epic tones, but breathed gently, as if the gods themselves preferred secrecy, cloaking their truth in whispers so that only the patient and the reverent might discern them. A listener, unhurried and still, would find that the mountain seems alive with layered names. Zeus Hypsistos, the Most High; Zeus Ktesios, keeper of the household store; Hera Teleia, guardian of marriage rites; Hera Basilissa, sovereign queen; Poseidon Hippios, lord of horses; Poseidon Enosigaios, earth-shaker. Each title shifts the god into a slightly different light, as though divinity were not a single shape but a kaleidoscope of fragments, turning endlessly under the weight of mortal devotion. Travellers from distant lands once paused at Olympus, staring upward with awe not only at its sheer height, but at the thought that the same god worshipped in their homeland might bear a different face here. A Thracian would call Dionysus by another name, wrapping him in the garb of a warrior. A Cretan would remember Zeus not as the lofty thunderer, but as a child once hidden in a cave, nourished by honey and the milk of a goat. A pilgrim from Asia Minor might murmur Artemis's name, yet see in her not the gentle huntress but the many-breasted mother of wild abundance. Olympus gathered these differences like tributaries flowing into a river, never discarding, always adding, until its slopes became less a single mountain and more a library of divine masks. And yet, to mortals dwelling in villages scattered like stones across the plain, Olympus was also companion, looming silently over fields of wheat and barley. In summer, its heights caught the sun, and shepherds shaded their eyes, muttering old invocations for fair weather and gentle winds. In winter, its peaks vanished beneath storms, and thunder rolled like drums of unseen armies. It was then, most of all, that the mountains seemed to sigh with many voices, and villagers would sit by their fires, repeating the myths that explained each trembling of the earth, each fall of snow, each sudden silence in the night. These tales, passed from elder to child, grew like vines, twining around the trunks of memory, until the gods were known not by a single face but by many, each suited to a moment of need. The poets, too, knew the secret of names. They recited hymns not in one voice but in many, calling the gods by long strings of epithets, as if to catch their attention required weaving every title into a net of words. To forget a name was to risk offending the immortal. To remember too many was to reveal that the divine could not be pinned down. Thus the whispers of Olympus are never still. They remind those who listen that behind each name lies another, and behind each face another shadow. To walk softly here is to accept that the gods are as shifting as the mists that coil around the summit. To name them is not to bind them, but to glimpse them, fleeting before they pass into silence again. And so, as the night deepens and the mountain merges with the sky, the listener is left with an awareness, both comforting and unsettling, that the gods of Olympus are never fixed, never entirely known, and that their whispers will continue as long as wind brushes stone and mortals lift their eyes upward. The mountain does not shout its secrets, it breathes them, quietly, eternally, for those willing to wait. Long before Olympus rose crowned in cloud, before Zeus held thunder in his palm, before even the Titans laid claim to heaven and earth, there was only a silence so vast it could not be measured. From that silence stirred chaos, not chaos as mortals understand it, no wild disorder of noise and battle, but a yawning gap, a chasm without form, a womb of potential waiting to quicken. Within chaos floated the first hints of being, dark, formless, yet pregnant with possibility, as though the world itself were a dream still unspoken. From this shadowy cradle came Gaia, the broad-bosomed earth, who stretched herself out like a vast plain beneath the void, steady and enduring. Beside her, Tartarus sank deep below, a cavern without bottom, heavy with the threat of confinement. Eros too emerged, not yet the winged youth of later tales, but a raw, stirring force, binding, uniting, urging separation to become union, darkness to awaken into light. These presences were not gods as mortals imagine, no shining forms, no thrones upon high, but currents of power, unseen, yet shaping all that would follow. Gaia, in her fullness, gave rise to sky and sea, to mountains that pressed upward like the bones of her body, to rivers that ran like her veins. She brought forth Uranus, the starry sky, as her equal and her consort, spreading above her as a dome of shimmering night. From their union came the first children of grandeur, the Titans, vast and gleaming, embodiments of sun, moon, memory, law, and time itself. But Gaia also bore beings too strange to fit the patterns of harmony, Cyclopes, with a single blazing eye, and the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, whose sheer power shook the foundations of existence. Uranus, fearing the strength of these monstrous offspring, thrust them back into Gaia's depths, burying them in her womb of earth. Her groans filled the cosmos, a mother pained by the weight of imprisoned children, and it was then that shadows of rebellion first began to form. But let us linger, for even here, in these primordial stirrings, the matter of names arises. Chaos, Gaia, Uranus, these are but the names that survived into Hellenic memory, yet across the world's scattered peoples they bore other titles. To Anatolian wanderers, the Earth Mother had another face, worshipped with wild dances in forest clearings. To Cretans, the starry dome above was not Uranus, but a serpent-shaped sky father, stretching endless and watchful. The Greeks, inheritors of many whispers, gathered these threads and wove them into the tapestry we now call myth. Thus, from the beginning, the gods were plural, shifting, their essence refracted into many tongues and traditions. To speak their names was to touch only the surface of something older, deeper, a current that ran through the marrow of humanity itself. Gaia, in her sorrow, sought liberation for her children. She forged within herself a blade of flint, sharp and cold, and offered it to her Titan sons. Yet fear bound them, save one Cronus, youngest but most ambitious, who took the weapon with hands unshaken. In a night of heavy silence, when Uranus stretched across the world in his glittering vastness, Cronus rose, and with that jagged blade he struck, severing the sky from the earth. The blood of Uranus fell upon Gaia, and from it sprang the Furies, avengers cloaked in shadow, the giants towering in their wrath, and white-armed nymphs who whispered in the rustle of ash trees. The severed power of Uranus was flung into the sea, and there it frothed into foam, birthing Aphrodite, whose beauty would one day ensnare gods and mortals alike. Thus, even in these first battles, divinity fractured and multiplied. One act, one wound, and countless faces emerged, each carrying its own name, each whispering another secret. Time, too, was born here not only as the endless rhythm of stars and seasons, but as a god himself, Kronos, whose name echoes differently across tongues. Some heard in him the devourer, swallowing all that came forth. Others called him Saturn, and in that name he bore gentler associations, a god of sowing and plenty, honoured in feasts of golden memory. So from the very roots of myth, one figure could stretch across meanings, cruel and kind, destroyer and sustainer, depending on the valley of worship and the needs of the heart that prayed. The shadows of the primordial world remind us that gods are not fixed statues of marble, but rivers that change course, depending on the land they flow through. And yet, for all this grandeur, the first myths remain wrapped in mystery. Who truly was chaos? Was it emptiness, or being itself? Was Gaia the earth beneath our feet, or the spirit within it? Were the Titans embodiments of forces, or were they already personalities with desires and jealousies? No single answer can bind them, for the poets and the priests, the villagers and the kings, each saw them differently, and each called them by names suited to their need. What remains clear is that the cosmos was not born with order, but with fracture and multiplicity. And from those first shadows, the pattern of divine shifting was set. Every god thereafter would bear many faces, every name another door to a hidden chamber. The shepherd listening beneath Olympus might not know of Chaos or Uranus, yet he would know the feel of earth beneath his sandals, the press of the sky above, the pull of love and hunger. And in those sensations, the old shadows lingered, speaking in whispers that could not be silenced. The primordial gods may have retreated into the background of myth, eclipsed by the brighter drama of Zeus and his kin, but their shadows remain, flowing through every story, every name that changes upon the mountain. They are the foundation stones, unseen yet unyielding, and without them, no palace of myth could stand. So the whispers of Olympus echo deeper still, down to the time when there was no Olympus, no throne, only the yawning silence of chaos and the first groans of Gaia. To hear them is to hear the roots of the world, the low hum of creation itself, which has never ceased, only clothed itself in new names as generations passed. And as you drift in thought upon these ancient currents, you realize the gods were never new, never fully born. They are shadows, unfolding, their names only veils upon the same eternal presence. After the first fracture, when Uranus had been cut away from Gaia's embrace, the world grew restless with new forms, each rising from the mingling of blood, stone, and memory. The Titans strode forth in their majesty, children of sky and earth, born tall as mountains and radiant with elemental power. They were not yet the familiar figures carved in marble by later hands, nor were they mere abstractions. They were forces given form, striding through the still young cosmos, embodying order, rhythm, and endurance. Each bore a face, yet each also stretched beyond the bounds of any single image, their identities shimmering across the valleys where their names were spoken. These first divinities were both individuals and principles, beings whose presence anchored the newborn world. Among them gleamed Hyperion, Lord of Light, whose gaze was the first dawn. By his side stood Theia, a shining presence who lent brilliance to the sky and preciousness to the metals hidden in the earth. Their union birthed Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the rosy-fingered dawn. To the shepherds of later generations, these children would seem clear and distinct, the blazing orb, the silver disk, the gentle blush of morning. Yet in the earliest whispers, their names were less fixed, shifting between regions, with Helios sometimes merged with Apollo, sometimes honoured as a separate flame. Even here, in the earliest stratum of memory, the gods refused to be confined by one name, one role. They were prisms, scattering light into many beams, each worshipper catching only one hue. Oceanus, too, emerged vast and encircling, his presence not limited to a single river, but flowing as the boundless waters surrounding the earth. He was not the sea as sailors knew it, with tides and storms, but the unending current, the girdle of the world. Beside him stood Tethys, who poured forth the rivers and nurtured the springs. Their children were countless rivers flowing with individual names, nymphs dancing in hidden groves, and yet all were fragments of the same endless source. To speak of Oceanus was to speak of infinity itself, and yet in later traditions his name faded, swallowed by Poseidon's surge, as if even divinity could ebb like tide. But beneath that surface forgetting, Oceanus remains, a reminder that the gods of Greece began not as singular thrones, but as expansive, encompassing presences, too vast to be captured in any one shrine. Mnemosyne, memory herself, walked among them, carrying in her being the knowledge of all that had been and all that could be recalled. Without her, the world would have dissolved into formlessness, for memory alone tethered the present to the past, allowing lineage and story to endure. In her womb she bore the Muses, those who would inspire song, history, and learning, gifting mortals a way to remember the divine. Yet even Mnemosyne's name bent and altered across regions. Some called her a river flowing through the underworld, from which souls might drink to regain recollection. Others whispered she was less a goddess than a force within the mind itself. Thus memory itself became many, and the goddess who embodied it bore masks as numerous as the tales she preserved. Themis, too, stood tall, embodiment of law and right order. She was not merely decree or punishment, but the deep rhythm of balance, the tilting of the scales, the guiding of kings, the promise of justice, even before the first polis had been raised. Later poets would soften her, imagining her seated beside Zeus as a counselor, but in the old order she was her own power, stern and unyielding, as old as earth itself. Alongside her moved Phoebe, radiant with prophetic flame, who would one day pass her gifts to Apollo at Delphi. Thus, even in the Titan age, the seeds of Olympian splendor were planted, flowing through bloodlines and titles like rivers crossing unseen. And yet, for all their majesty, the Titans were not fixed in story. In one valley, Cronus was hailed as the first king, golden-handed and just, ruling in an age of peace. In another, he was the devourer, feared and cursed, a shadow to be overthrown. In one hymn, Hyperion was the shining father of light. In another, Helios alone bore the sun's fire, leaving his father's name to sink into obscurity. Even Rhea, mother of gods, was not the same from one worshipper to another. In Crete, she was the mountain goddess, dancing with wild drums among her attendants, the Curatess. In Greece, she softened into a maternal figure, gentle, enthroned, protective. Her name shifted like a veil in the wind, yet behind each veil the same pulse could be felt, the primal mother, enduring across centuries. The first divinities were therefore not only beings of myth, but also mirrors of humanity's attempt to grasp the world. They arose wherever mortals sought to give voice to forces too immense to bear unnamed. The cycle of the sun, the swell of rivers, the rhythm of memory, the hunger for justice. Each Titan was both a person and a principle, both father and law, both child and storm. And as mortals prayed, sang, and feared, their names multiplied, refracting into local cults and hidden hymns, so that the same divinity could be praised as kind in one place and dreaded in another. The gods allowed this multiplicity, for they themselves were not bound by singularity. Their essence lay in being many, shifting as easily as wind shifts over a sea. The mountain of Olympus, not yet crowned with the Olympians, still felt these early presences. Beneath its slopes, shepherds told tales of Oceanus flowing beyond the horizon, of Helios pulling his chariot across the sky, of Mnemosyne whispering into poets' dreams. Though the Titans themselves would one day be cast into shadow, their echoes lived on in the words and rituals of mortals. Every oath sworn by river or by memory, every hymn to sun or dawn, bore within it the weight of these ancient beings. And even when later generations forgot their names, the essence of their power endured, clothed in new titles, hidden within Olympian majesty. Thus, the first divinities remain, shadows beneath the brighter myths, their names like deep roots unseen beneath the tree. To remember them is to remember that even the gods of Olympus had forebears, and that behind every thunderclap of Zeus, every prophecy of Apollo, every grain of Demeter, lies the memory of titans whose forms were as wide as the sky and as deep as the sea. And as the night air gathers on the mountain's heights, their whispers rise once more, quiet but enduring, reminding the listener that gods do not begin with clarity, they begin in shadow, and their shadows never leave. From the womb of Gaia and the blood of Uranus came forth Cronus, youngest of the Titans, yet bold enough to raise the sickle against the sky and divide the world into earth below and heaven above. In the dawn of myth, when no throne yet gleamed upon Olympus, it was Cronus who became ruler, draped not in glory but in inevitability. For he was more than king, he was time itself, flowing in cycles of birth and decay, sowing and reaping, rising and falling. His reign was remembered in two voices, one gentle, one grim. In distant memories, he was honoured as the lord of a golden age, when men lived without toil or grief, when fields bore fruit without plough, and when mortals died as softly as falling asleep. Yet in darker tales, he was feared as the devourer, swallowing each child that Rhea bore, unwilling to relinquish power to the blood of his own line. Thus, the image of Cronus shifted, depending on who whispered his name, depending on whether time was seen as a giver of plenty or a thief of years. To the people of Attica, his name lingered in festival, Cronia, where masters and slaves sat side by side, recalling the harmony of that first golden rule. In Italy, his face wore the gentler mask of Saturn, lord of sowing, protector of seeds, whose feast of Saturnalia turned the darkest days of winter into light and laughter. For a week, roles were reversed, gifts exchanged, and the memory of abundance returned, as though humanity longed for a glimpse of the golden past. But elsewhere, in whispered hymns of warning, Cronus was remembered as the shadow that lurked behind all creation, the inevitability of decline, the eater of his own children. For every season that blooms must wither, every child that is born must one day fade, and Cronus was the embodiment of that inescapable truth. Rhea, his consort and sister, bore him many children: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Each birth was shadowed by dread. For Cronus, remembering the prophecy that one of his offspring would overthrow him, as he had his father, devoured them whole. Their cries echoed only in their mother's heart, muffled by his insatiable maw. To mortals, the tale is grim, but behind it lies a truth both simple and profound. Time swallows all things, and nothing born is free of its hunger. To worship Cronus was not to love him, but to acknowledge the shadow cast across all life. And yet, even here, his name shifted. Some whispered that he did not devour the children, but sent them away, hidden, preserving them until their time came. Others claimed that he ruled not as tyrant but as caretaker, holding the world in balance until a new order was ready to rise. So the story bends, reshaped by memory and need. But Rhea, heavy with her sixth child, could no longer bear the devouring. She fled to the island of Crete, where in the shadow of Mount Ida she gave birth to Zeus. To protect him, she wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and placed it in Cronus's hands. Unsuspecting, he swallowed it whole, believing the threat extinguished. Meanwhile, the infant Zeus was hidden in a cave, nurtured by the nymphs Adrasteia and Ida, fed on honey and the milk of Amalthea the goat. To drown his cries, the Curetes clashed their spears against their shields, a thunderous din that concealed his voice from his father's ear. Thus Zeus grew in secrecy, a seed of rebellion, another echo of the endless cycle of child against parent, of new time rising to consume the old. Cronus, as Saturn, was later softened in memory, clothed in robes of agriculture, honoured in temples where seeds were stored for the next season. In Rome, his temple in the Forum held the state treasury, as if wealth and seed alike were entrusted to time's keeping. Here he was not the devourer but the preserver, the lord of cycles who promised renewal. The Romans celebrated him with joy, as if to forget his darker face. But in the Greek heart, Cronus was never free of the sickle, never far from the memory of swallowed children. His story lingered as both warning and explanation, that every king, however mighty, will one day be dethroned, that every age, however golden, will fall into shadow. The whisper of Cronus still hums on Olympus, though he does not sit among the 12. His shadow lies beneath their thrones, reminding them that time is the one force none can escape. Zeus may hurl thunderbolts, Poseidon may shake the earth, Athena may weave wisdom, but Cronus waits, patient, devouring, until even their names may shift into memory. And yet mortals, in their longing, soften him, remembering the gentle Saturn who once presided over peace. For humanity cannot live always with fear, it must also dream of ages when time itself was kind. Thus the cycle of Cronus teaches not only of fear but of transformation. He devours, yet from his devouring new life arises. He rules, yet from his fall comes renewal. His name changes as his face does. Saturn to the west, Kronos to the east, devourer in one tale, benefactor in another. To speak of him is to acknowledge that time itself is both gift and terror, a golden harvest and an empty field. His shadow lies upon every story that follows, for without him no Olympian throne could rise, no prophecy could be fulfilled, no cycle could turn. He is both the end and the beginning, the sickle that cuts and the seed that grows anew. And so the mountain whispers his name with reverence and unease. Cronus, Lord of cycles, King of shadows, Father of gods, Eater of years. He is not gone. He lingers in every festival of remembrance, every winter feast, every story of a golden age. He remains as time itself remains, veiled, ever-changing, never still. Rhea, heavy with sorrow and determination, carried her sixth child in silence, each step through the forests of Crete echoing with fear of discovery. Around her, the earth seemed to bend in sympathy, offering hidden groves, caves draped in ivy, and streams that murmured lullabies as if to comfort her burden. Cronus, unyielding and suspicious, ruled the cosmos with the certainty that nothing could escape his grasp, for he had already swallowed 5 of his offspring. Yet in the secret chambers of Gaia, whispers grew louder that the cycle would not end with Cronus, that another child would rise, as he had risen against Uranus, to strike and renew the order. In this hushed expectation, Zeus was born, not with thunderbolts in hand, but with the soft cry of an infant, sheltered in shadows that Cronus could not pierce. Rhea's cunning was her act of defiance. She wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth, its weight convincing enough to deceive the devourer. Cronus, blind in his hunger for control, swallowed it whole, believing he had secured his throne against fate. The stone fell into his cavernous stomach, joining the prison where his other children lay trapped in silence. Meanwhile, far from his gaze, Rhea entrusted her newborn to the guardians of Crete. The nymphs Adrastea and Ida took him into their care, their hands gentle as they cradled the infant, their eyes fierce with the knowledge that they sheltered destiny itself. Amalthea, the goat whose milk would nourish him, bent her head tenderly, her horns gleaming like crescents of the young moon. Bees of the sacred mountain hovered near, dripping honey upon his lips, as if nature itself conspired to raise this hidden child. The cave of Dictae, dark and echoing, became his cradle, its walls alive with the flicker of torches and the clangor of the curetes. These armored dancers, chosen guardians, clashed their shields with spears in rhythmic thunder, masking the cries of the infant with their tumult. Each crash of bronze upon bronze was both a lullaby and a deception, drowning out the sound that might have betrayed him. To later generations, their dance became ritual, reenacted in festivals that honored the concealment of the king of gods. But in that first moment, it was necessity, a symphony of noise against silence, a wall of sound against Cronus's suspicion. As Zeus grew, nurtured in secrecy, the mountain itself seemed to watch. Its cliffs guarded him, its streams refreshed him, its winds whispered prophecies in his dreams. In some traditions, it was not Dictae, but Mount Ida, that sheltered him, its slopes covered in wild oaks and laurel. Others whispered that in Arcadia, far from Crete, Rhea birthed him among ancient groves. Each region claimed a fragment of his infancy, reshaping the memory to link their land with the origin of the divine king. Thus, even in his cradle, Zeus bore many births, many names, many sanctuaries. His story was not one but many, flowing into different valleys and tongues. This fluidity did not weaken the myth, it deepened it, binding communities to the god through shared yet distinct threads of memory. The infancy of Zeus was a time of shadows and whispers, but within it lay symbols that endured. Amalthea, whose horn broke while he played, became the cornucopia, horn of plenty, a promise that the god would one day bring abundance. The bees of Ida, whose honey sweetened his lips, became sacred to him, messengers of the divine order that he would one day impose. The Curites, whose clangor preserved his life, embodied the warrior bands who would later serve gods and heroes, their rituals echoing the first defense of divinity itself. Even the stone that Cronus swallowed, later disgorged when Zeus rose against him, became sacred, set in Delphi, polished smooth by worshippers' hands as they anointed it with oil. That stone, Omphalos, the navel of the world, bore testimony to the cunning of Rhea and the infancy of her son. As Zeus matured in secrecy, he learned not only strength but cunning. He was not yet the thunderer, not yet the king of gods, but a youth schooled by shadows. He wandered the mountains with nymphs, learning the rhythm of streams, the cry of eagles, the patience of stone. Each lesson was quiet, slow, as if the world itself prepared him for the weight he would one day carry. Myths tell of him wrestling with giants, or testing his strength against the elements, though these are but echoes of the later Zeus projected backward. What mattered was that he grew, hidden yet inevitable, the seed of rebellion swelling beneath the rule of Cronus. Meanwhile, Rhea endured her grief in silence, watching her children lost within Cronus's belly, waiting for the moment when Zeus would be ready. For time itself could not halt the prophecy. Cronus, devourer though he was, could not consume fate. The cycle demanded that the child overthrow the father, just as the father had overthrown the grandfather. It was a story written not in ink but in the marrow of the cosmos, a law older than law, a rhythm older than song. Zeus's birth was not only a mother's defiance, it was the pivot upon which ages turned, the whisper that would swell into thunder. In distant shrines, generations later, mortals would tell his story in softened tones, each region claiming the cradle, each cave echoing with hymns of his hidden infancy. Yet behind the variations lay a single truth, that even the mightiest gods began in vulnerability, concealed, threatened, and protected by love and cunning. The birth of Zeus was a reminder that power does not arrive full-formed but grows slowly, nurtured in secret, sheltered by those who resist tyranny. And when the time came, that hidden child would rise, not only to free his siblings but to shape the order of heaven itself. Thus the whispers of Olympus gather around the cave of Crete, telling of the infant swaddled in darkness, nourished by honey and milk, lulled by bronze and drum. They tell of the stone swallowed in error, the cunning of a mother, the patience of fate. And they remind us that even gods, before they are throned, are children hidden from danger, fragile yet destined, their names shifting across mountains, their stories bending to the voices of those who keep their memory alive. When Zeus reached his strength, no longer the hidden child of a cave but the rising force of destiny, the world itself seemed to lean toward a reckoning. The age of Titans, long enduring, now trembled beneath a storm gathering from within. For Cronus had swallowed his children, and though he believed them lost, they still lived in darkness, their presence pressing against his belly like seeds yearning for release. Zeus, with cunning equal to his mother's, sought allies among gods and earthborn beings alike, preparing for the clash that would decide the shape of the cosmos. Thus began the Titanomachy, the war of gods and titans, thunderous and unrelenting, shaking heaven and earth for 10 full years. It was not a battle of men with swords, nor armies with banners, but a struggle of elemental powers. From Mount Olympus, Zeus hurled his lightning, fire forged from the storm itself, each bolt a spear of brilliance piercing the night. Poseidon, his brother freed, lifted the sea in towering waves, his trident shaking the earth so mountains crumbled. Hades, dark and stern, spread shadows that consumed the sight of their foes, binding the battlefield in dread. Their sisters, too, stood with them, Hera's wrath, Demeter's fertility twisted into famine, and Hestia's fire warming the hearts of their allies. Together, the freed Olympians forged a new order, each voice swelling into the chorus of rebellion. Cronus and the Titans did not yield easily. Atlas bore the weight of their defiance, shoulders unbending, his strength a mountain in itself. Hyperion's light blazed against Zeus's storm, while Oceanus rumbled from the depths. The earth quaked not merely from blows, but from the strain of existence itself, as if Gaia feared to choose between her children, for she had birthed them all, Titans and Olympians alike, and her heart broke with each cry of battle. The clash was not only of power, but of time itself, the old age against the new, the eternal cycle of overthrow repeating once more. The war might have remained balanced forever had Zeus not sought allies beyond the known. From the depths of Tartarus he freed the Cyclopes, whom Uranus and Cronus alike had bound in chains. Grateful, they forged for him gifts of power, thunder, lightning, and the thunderbolt, each crackling with divine might. To Poseidon they gave the trident, sharp as the sea's anger, capable of splitting the earth. To Hades they bestowed the helmet of invisibility, a shroud of shadow that rendered him unseen. Thus armed, the Olympians pressed their attack with renewed vigour, their weapons gleaming like dawn breaking through the night. The Hecatoncheires, 100-handed giants, also rose from their imprisonment, their vast arms hurling mountains as if they were stones, their voices shaking the heavens with roars of defiance. With their aid, the tide turned, and the Titans, once steadfast, began to falter. Cronus, wielding his sickle, fought with desperate rage, but fate had already written his fall. The final clash shook the cosmos, the cries of battle echoing across the void, until Zeus, in a storm of lightning, struck down his father, casting him and his brethren into the depths of Tartarus. There, beneath the world, they were bound in chains, unbreakable, guarded by the Hecatoncheires they had once scorned. Thus dawn broke upon Olympus, no longer a silent mountain but the throne of the new gods. The Titanomachy had ended, and in its silence the world itself exhaled, weary yet reborn. The sky cleared, the seas stilled, and the earth sighed with relief. The Olympians, victorious, did not yet sit in peace, for much still lay before them. Battles with giants, struggles with monsters, but in that first dawn of triumph they knew the cycle had turned. A new order had risen, and with it new names, new powers, new masks for the divine. Zeus was enthroned as king of heaven, his thunderbolt flashing as both weapon and symbol of authority. Hera took her place beside him, not yet reconciled with her fate as consort, but already bound to him by prophecy and power. Poseidon claimed the sea, his trident gleaming, while Hades accepted the underworld, silent but absolute. Their sisters too bore their mantles, Hestia at the hearth, Demeter over the grain, Hera over marriage and sovereignty. The Olympian family, fractured by Cronus's hunger, now stood united, each domain secured, each name whispered across valleys and temples. And yet, even as dawn broke, the memory of the Titans lingered. In some valleys, they were not forgotten foes but honoured as elder powers, worshipped in secret rites, their names shifting into local cults. Cronus himself, though chained in Tartarus, softened into Saturn across the seas, a god of plenty, his devouring face hidden beneath gentler stories. Atlas, punished to hold the sky upon his shoulders, became a figure of endurance, carved into myth not as enemy, but as eternal witness. Even in defeat, the Titans endured, their shadows lingering beneath the bright light of Olympus. For divinity does not vanish, it transforms, bearing new names, new stories, each shaped by those who remember. Thus, the Olympian dawn was not the end of the old, but the mingling of old and new, a weaving of shadows into brilliance. On Olympus the thrones were set, gleaming in morning light, but beneath them lay the echoes of battle, the whispers of those who came before. Mortals, raising hymns to Zeus and his kin, still felt the tremor of Cronus in their fields, the light of Hyperion in their skies, the endless ocean of Tethys in their streams. And the gods themselves, though triumphant, bore within them the memory of what they had overthrown, a reminder that their reign, too, was but one cycle in the eternal rhythm of time. So the mountain glowed with new majesty, its summit crowned not only with mist but with the thrones of gods. The war had ended, the day had begun, and the whispers of Olympus grew louder, carrying the names of the new rulers. But behind each name lay the old, hidden yet present, a reminder that dawn is never free of shadow, and every beginning carries within it the memory of what came before. The throne of Olympus gleamed beneath the new order, and at its center sat Zeus, the thunder-wielding king, enthroned not only by power, but by the inevitability of fate. Yet to speak of Zeus as if he were one and whole is to miss the essence of his divinity, for he was not only the sky father, not merely the cloud-gatherer, nor simply the hurler of thunderbolts. He was a god of many names, each reflecting a face, a mood, a domain of influence. To the mortals who prayed at his altars, Zeus was never one figure, but a shifting presence, whose identity could not be bound by a single mask. He was the shapeshifter, fluid as the storm he commanded, vast as the sky that bore 1,000 changing faces from dawn to dusk. In the high hymns of Homer, he was Zeus Olympios, lord of the shining throne, enthroned on cloud-wreathed heights, his will bending gods and men alike. Yet in the marketplace, where merchants weighed grain and oil, he was Zeus Agoraios, protector of oaths sworn beneath the open sky. At the hearth of homes, he was Zeus Ketesios, guardian of the storeroom, keeping watch over jars of flour and olive oil. In temples where kings laid crowns upon their brows, he was Zeus Basileus, sovereign, bestower of right rule. And in lonely mountain shrines, he was Zeus Kataibates, the one who descends with lightning, striking fear and reverence into the hearts of those who watched storms break the earth. Each epithet was not a separate god, nor merely a poetic flourish, but a recognition of his multiplicity, the shimmering truth that one divinity might wear countless faces depending on where one stood. The poets told too of his transformations in form, not only in name. When desire stirred in him, he clothed himself in disguises, slipping past mortal eyes in shapes both wondrous and strange. He became a swan to embrace Leda, his feathers white against her mortal frame. He descended as a golden shower, radiant and shimmering, to enter the chamber of Danae and seed the hero Perseus. He disguised himself as a bull, great and shining, to carry Europa across the sea to Crete. To some, these stories were scandal, tales of lust and conquest. To others, they were allegories, symbols of divine power entering the mortal realm in unexpected forms. Yet all spoke of his essence, a god who would not be fixed, who wore the world itself as a costume, who revealed himself in whatever shape served his will. In Dodona, beneath the rustling oaks, he was Zeus Naos, whose voice spoke through the leaves, carried by doves and the murmur of wind. Pilgrims came not to see his statue but to hear his whisper, consulting the rustle of branches as though each sound bore the weight of divine judgment. There, he was less a thunderer than a quiet oracle, speaking softly through nature's breath. In Arcadia, he was Zeus Lycaios, wolfish and primal, worshipped with rites so old and shadowed that even the Greeks themselves whispered of strange sacrifices. In Crete, where he had been born, he was remembered not as the eternal father, but as a child. Zeus Kouros, worshipped in his infancy with dances and drums, as though the god still carried within him the memory of being hidden in a cave. Each region claimed him differently, each face as true as the next, for the god was all of them, and none of them at once. This multiplicity extended beyond temples, into the very air mortals breathed. When storms gathered, clouds rolling, and lightning flashing, they whispered Zeus Ombrios, bringer of rain. When the sky cleared and crops flourished, he was Zeus Georgos, the farmer's friend. When strangers knocked at doors, weary from travel, mortals welcomed them in Zeus Xenios' name, for the god of thunder was also protector of guests and wanderers. To break hospitality was to offend Zeus himself, who might walk the roads in disguise, testing mortals' kindness. In this way, he was both distant king of gods and close companion of men, ruler of Olympus yet present at every hearth, in every oath, in every storm and silence. But there was also fear in his fluidity, for a god who shifts cannot be contained, cannot be known in his entirety. Zeus was the lawgiver, yet he was also the breaker of boundaries, crossing lines of mortal and immortal, animal and human, sacred and profane. His justice could be merciful or merciless, his thunderbolt punishing not only the wicked but those who drew his displeasure in ways mortals could not fathom. To some, he was Zeus Horkios, punisher of oathbreakers, stern and unforgiving. To others, he was Zeus Melichios, gentle and gracious, his worshippers offering cakes and honey in hope of his softer side. Thus the god was a paradox, both protector and destroyer, both father and seducer, both merciful and wrathful. Mortals learned to accept this paradox, for it mirrored the sky itself, clear one moment, storming the next, eternal yet ever-changing. On Olympus, Zeus's shape-shifting nature kept even the gods on edge. Hera, his queen, bore the brunt of his transformations, for she could never fully bind him, never wholly restrain his wanderings of desire and disguise. Yet she too was bound in the cycle, for her sovereignty as queen depended on his kingship, and together they embodied the balance of power and union. The other gods, though subject to his will, also learned that Zeus's favour could shift as quickly as his form. One day he might raise a mortal to glory, another he might strike them down. Even among immortals, his unpredictability was a force to be feared. And yet, through all his shifting faces, there was one constant. He was the embodiment of sovereignty, the principle of order reigning above chaos. His transformations, his many names, his countless epithets, did not fragment him. They expressed the breadth of his dominion. To call upon Zeus in any form was to acknowledge the vastness of the divine, a force too great to be contained in one title. Mortals, with their many needs, shaped him into many faces, and the god allowed it, for in their multiplicity lay his truth. He was not one god among many, he was the many within one. So the whispers of Olympus echo with his names, each carried on the wind like shifting clouds across the sky. Zeus Olympios, Zeus Zenios, Zeus Ombrios, Zeus Basileus, a thunderer, a wanderer, a guest, a storm, a child, a king. His essence cannot be grasped in a single image, for he is shapeshifter, cloud-gatherer, sky-father, and stranger at the door. To pray to Zeus is to pray to all skies at once, the storm, the sun, the dawn, the night. And in that fluidity lies his power, and his danger, and his eternal dominion. If Zeus reigned as the shapeshifter of Olympus, his queen, Hera, was no less layered in her mystery. To most mortals she was the golden-crowned goddess of marriage, the sovereign queen seated beside her thunder-bearing husband, regal in dignity, stern in her gaze. Yet to listen to the deeper whispers that curled along the slopes of Olympus and in the valleys below, one would hear not a single name but many, for Hera too wore masks that shifted across time and land. Behind the marble images of queenly calm lay older faces, more primal, rooted in earth and fertility, in growth and decay, in womanhood itself. To worship Hera was to honour not only the throne but the hearth, the cradle, the womb, and the cycles that bind all life. In Argos, her most ancient seat, she was Hera Argeia, honoured as the protector of the city, where her temple stood vast and resplendent, older even than the Parthenon that would one day gleam in Athens. Here, she was not merely the consort of Zeus, but a sovereign in her own right, a goddess of fertility and the seasons, entwined with the life of the land. Pilgrims came to her festivals bearing offerings of pomegranates, symbols of abundance and hidden seeds, reminders of life waiting within death. In her honour, processions wound through the fields, garlands of flowers adorning her images, as though to recall her as the giver of fruit and harvest. The Argives whispered her name not in fear of jealousy but in gratitude for sustenance, as though Hera were less a queen of Olympus and more a mother of the soil. Elsewhere, she bore different faces. In Samos, she was Hera Teleia, the goddess of marriage fulfilled, invoked in the joining of husband and wife. Brides offered her locks of hair, tokens of their transition from maidenhood to womanhood, acknowledging her power over the sacred bond that held households together. Yet even here, she was not only the gentle patroness of weddings, but also the fierce defender of oaths. To betray vows sworn under her gaze was to invite her wrath, for she did not forgive lightly. In this double-faced tender protector and relentless avenger lay the truth of her divinity. She embodied the sacredness of union, and to break it was to offend the goddess herself. Hera was also a goddess of sovereignty, enthroned not merely as wife of Zeus but as queen in her own right. Hera Basilissa, they called her, the regal one, whose diadem bore the authority of rulership. In some regions, she was worshipped alone, her throne set beside no consorts, her rule acknowledged as independent. Temples rose to her not as companion but as sovereign, their rituals affirming her strength, and yet poets and storytellers of later ages wove her most often into tales of jealousy, of wrath against Zeus's countless lovers and their children. This, too, was a mask one that revealed her power through fear, for even in anger, Hera's essence endured. She was guardian of the sanctity of bonds, protector of the order that Zeus himself often disrupted. Her fury was not merely spite, but the cry of a goddess who held fast to what should remain unbroken. In older whispers, beneath the Olympian veneer, Hera bore traces of earth goddess worship, linked to cycles of fertility and decay. Some hymns spoke of her as cow-eyed, not merely for beauty but as a symbol of nurturing abundance, the cow being sacred for its milk, its patience, its link to sustenance. Her ancient sanctuaries often included sacred animals, cows, peacocks and doves, each bearing a layer of symbolism. The peacock for watchfulness, its many eyes recalling her all-seeing presence. The dove for love and renewal, harking to older cults where Hera presided over fertility. Thus the Olympian queen concealed beneath her crown the memory of a goddess who once reigned as Earth Mother, whose dominion stretched not only over marriage but over the very cycles of life itself. Her relationship with Zeus reflected these many faces. As consort, she was the queen of heaven, but as rival, she was the eternal challenger of his wayward will. Their marriage was sung as both sacred and stormy, embodying the tension between order and disruption, fidelity and betrayal. In myths, she pursued his lovers, striking at their children, Heracles, Semele, Io. But behind these tales lay a deeper truth. Hera was the voice of sovereignty, resisting the chaos of shifting forms. If Zeus was the shapeshifter, Hera was the anchor, the power that bound, resisted, and preserved. Without her, marriage and sovereignty would dissolve into disorder. With her, they endured, though not without conflict. Even among mortals, Hera was invoked in many ways. Women prayed to her for strength in childbirth, for protection in marriage, for stability in their households. Cities invoked her for sovereignty, kings swore by her for legitimacy, and travelers remembered her symbols in the stars. The Milky Way itself, some whispered, was born of her. Milk spilled across the heavens, luminous reminder of her power to nurture even in the celestial realm. Thus, she was both queen of the sky and mother of the earth, a goddess whose faces spanned the cosmos itself. And yet, like Zeus, Hera was not bound by one name. In one valley, she was honored with gentle hymns as Teleia, the perfect bride. In another, she was feared as jealous and vengeful, her eyes unyielding. In another still, she was sovereign and supreme, enthroned above all others. Each face was true, each mask a glimpse into the many layers of her being. To pray to Hera was to step into her paradox, a goddess both tender and wrathful, both nurturing and destructive, both bound to Zeus and independent of him. The whispers of Olympus tell her story in hushed tones, for they know her presence is not to be taken lightly. Hera, golden-crowned, cow-eyed, sovereign queen, Hera of Argos, Hera of Samos, Hera of Olympus, a goddess who wears many faces, yet behind them all remains the same enduring force. The sanctity of union, the sovereignty of order, the power of womanhood raised to divinity. To name her is to honor not only the queen beside Zeus, but the hidden earth goddess within, whose faces still shimmer beneath the marble calm. Beneath the thunder of Zeus and the sovereign gaze of Hera, another brother took his realm, vast and unpredictable, shifting as endlessly as the tides. Poseidon, lord of the sea, rose with his trident in hand, his hair foaming like waves, his eyes flashing with the violence of storms. To mortals who gazed upon the sea's horizon, endless and uncertain, Poseidon was both dread and necessity, a god whose moods could bless with calm waters or crush with tempest. Yet like his siblings, he was not bound by a single face. He was not merely the shaker of earth or the rider of waves. His names and epithets spilled across lands both coastal and inland, for his dominion stretched wider than salt and surf. He was a god of contradictions, a deity whose identity shifted like the sea he commanded. To the fishermen of the Aegean, he was Poseidon Enosigaios, earth-shaker, whose wrath could split the seabed and bring tremors that toppled cities. To sailors, he was Poseidon Asphaleos, protector of safe harbours, prayed to before each voyage with sacrifices of black bulls, their bodies drowned in the surf, so that his favour might carry ships across perilous waters. Yet inland, far from the roar of the sea, his presence was not diminished. In Thessaly, he was Poseidon Hippios, god of horses, the swift-footed animals whose strength mirrored the surging waves. To farmers, he was a bringer of springs, his trident striking dry ground to call forth fresh water. Thus he was worshipped not only on islands and shores but in valleys and fields, for his power encompassed all fluid motion, the roll of tide, the gallop of hooves, the gush of rivers from stone. The myths tell of his contest with Athena for Athens, a story that reveals both his generosity and his pride. When the city sought a divine patron, he struck the earth with his trident, and from the rock sprang a saltwater spring, or, in other tellings, a horse. Athena, by contrast, offered the olive tree, bearer of fruit, oil, and shade. The people judged her gift more useful, and so the city bore her name. Poseidon, wounded in pride, never forgot the slight, and the sea's storms often struck Attica with his bitterness. Yet even in defeat, his offerings revealed the breadth of his essence. The spring, the horse, the sea itself, each a form of movement, power, and vitality. His loss did not diminish him. It only revealed that he could not be contained by one city. In Corinth, his temples rose upon cliffs, worshippers gazing out to sea as they prayed for his favour. There, he was honoured as both sailor's guide and avenger, his name whispered in gratitude and fear. In Arcadia, he was not of the sea at all but of the earth's depths, a god of hidden rivers, his image carved in rustic shrines far from waves. To the Spartans, he was warrior, invoked before battle as Poseidon Phytalmios, giver of strength and progeny. Each cult, each valley, called him differently, as though the sea itself ever-changing, never still, was reflected in his shifting masks. Yet Poseidon was not only worshipped for gifts, he was feared for his wrath. His trident, when struck upon the ground, could bring earthquakes, swallowing cities, splitting mountains. Sailors trembling in storms called out his name, seeking mercy, for they knew he could sink fleets with a thought. He was the father of monsters too, his unions with sea nymphs and mortals alike, birthing creatures both wondrous and terrible. From his line came Theseus, the hero of Athens, but also Polyphemus, the Cyclops blinded by Odysseus, who cursed the wanderer with his father's fury. Thus Poseidon embodied the duality of the sea, a source of life, travel, and wealth, and a graveyard for ships, a devourer of men. And still, he bore gentler faces. In some hymns, he was invoked as a god of fertility, his waters nourishing fields, his springs blessing herds. In Boeotia, his festival of Hippodromea honoured him not with ships, but with horses, their hooves pounding like waves upon the earth. To those who knew him as spring-bringer, he was less wrathful storm and more quiet giver of sustenance. To those who prayed at his coastal shrines, he was the guardian of harbours, calming the sea for trade and travel. Thus mortals chose the face of Poseidon they needed, and the god allowed them, for he was all these faces at once. Among the Olympians, Poseidon's role was not only sea lord but also balance. He rivaled Zeus at times, his pride matching his brother's authority, and myths tell of conspiracies where he joined Hera and Athena in rebellion against the Thunderer. Yet at other times, he stood as ally, hurling storms against enemies of Olympus. His bond with Hades was quieter, but no less strong, for the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, were the pillars of the cosmos, sky, sea, and underworld. Each held a realm, each bore authority, yet each depended on the other to maintain the order born of their father's fall. In art, Poseidon was carved with trident in hand, his body muscled like a wave, his chariot drawn by hippocamps, creatures half horse, half fish leaping across the sea's surface. Yet these images, as grand as they were, captured only fragments of him. For Poseidon was more than wave and storm, more than horse and spring. He was the deep itself, unfathomable, ever-changing, dangerous and necessary. To name him was to acknowledge the sea's power over human life, its gifts and its perils, its calm and its rage. So the whispers of Olympus speak of him in many voices. Poseidon Enosigaios, the earth-shaker. Poseidon Hippios, lord of horses. Poseidon Phytalmios, giver of fertility. Poseidon Asphaleos, guardian of harbours. Each epithet another wave upon the shore, another reflection of his vastness. He is the deep, and the deep cannot be contained by one name. Far from the brightness of Olympus and the shifting face of the sea, there lies a realm unlit by sun or moon, a kingdom of silence and shadow. It was given not to Zeus, who claimed the heavens, nor to Poseidon, who claimed the waters, but to the third brother, Hades, whose throne was set beneath the earth. Here he reigned, not in thunder nor in storm, but in stillness, a god cloaked in secrecy, whose very name mortals feared to utter. For to call upon Hades was to summon death itself, and so his presence was veiled in euphemism, softened by titles, hidden beneath whispered names. To the Greeks, his realm was inescapable, yet his name was avoided, as though to speak it openly would draw his gaze and hasten the inevitable end. Thus he was called not Hades but Pluton, the giver of wealth, for from the earth's depths came the treasures of gold, silver, and fertile soil. Farmers prayed not to Hades, grim lord of the dead, but to Pluton, source of abundance, who blessed their crops with nourishment drawn from beneath. This softer name allowed mortals to honour him without trembling, to acknowledge his power without inviting dread. Yet even in this kindly guise, the truth of his dominion lingered. All abundance sprang from the soil, and all who fed upon it would one day return to it. Wealth and death were bound together in his being, inseparable, two faces of the same god. In the halls beneath the earth, he ruled with Persephone, the maiden carried from the fields of Enna into shadow, who became his queen. Their marriage was told in tones of sorrow and inevitability, for Persephone's descent marked the cycle of seasons, her return to her mother Demeter bringing spring, her sojourn in Hades bringing winter's barrenness. Together, they embodied the rhythm of life and death, growth and decay, joy and mourning. Yet even Persephone bore shifting faces. To some, she was the unwilling captive, forever longing for the sun. To others, she was queen of the underworld, powerful and solemn, seated beside her husband as equal. And in her duality, Hades too was refracted, not only captor but consort, not only ruler of shadows but king enthroned in a realm as inevitable as the sky. The underworld itself was not a place of torment alone but of order, divided into realms where souls found their fitting fate. The asphodel meadows stretched grey and endless, where ordinary souls drifted in forgetfulness. The Elysian fields shone with light, promised to heroes and the blessed, a vision of peace and joy beyond the mortal struggle. The deep pits of Tartarus held the punished, chained and writhing, reminders of justice that even gods could not escape. And through it all flowed the rivers, Styx, Lethe, Acheron, Cocytus, Phlegethon, each bearing its own truth of death, oaths, forgetfulness, sorrow, fire. Hades ruled them all, not as tormentor but as sovereign, ensuring that balance endured, that each soul was kept where fate had decreed. Mortals, however, seldom separated him from the fear of death. To speak Hades aloud was rare, avoided except in necessity. Instead, they spoke of the unseen one, the hidden, the silent. They left offerings at his shrines in the dark of night, pouring libations into the earth so that the god might accept them unseen. Sacrifices to him were black, not white. Their blood seeped downward, never upward, for his gaze was ever turned below. In Athens, the Erinyes had their shrine, but Hades had none within the city, for to honour him openly was to invite a presence too heavy for daily life. And yet, in the secrecy of the mysteries at Eleusis, in Orphic hymns his name was whispered with reverence, his role acknowledged as necessary. Without Hades, there could be no cycle, no return, no renewal. His presence was austere, yet not cruel. Unlike Zeus, he did not meddle in the affairs of mortals, nor like Poseidon did he hurl storms against them. His rule was silent, inevitable, impartial. He did not choose death for mortals, he received them when they came. In this way, his distance bore a strange comfort. He was not enemy, but boundary, not punisher, but custodian. His helmet, forged by the Cyclopes, rendered him invisible, and this symbol captured his essence. He was always present, yet unseen, always near, yet unacknowledged. His name, like his helmet, cloaked him, reminding mortals that the greatest power is often silent. And yet, even in silence, he was worshipped. In Sicily, in Thessaly, in dark groves where shadows lingered, rites were offered to him and Persephone. Farmers buried seeds in the ground, praying for their rise as grain, mirroring the descent and return of the goddess. To honor Hades was to honor the soil itself, the womb and the grave, the dark that gives life and receives it again. Thus he was Pluton as much as Hades, wealth-giver as much as death-lord, his many names softening and refracting the fear he inspired. Among the gods, Hades was both brother and other. He did not dwell on Olympus, nor did he stride upon the sea. His kingdom set him apart, yet his power was equal. Zeus held the sky, Poseidon the sea, but Hades held what was most certain, the destiny of every mortal. And though he did not sit among the 12, his shadow lay across all their thrones. For every prayer to Zeus, every offering to Hera, every hymn to Demeter, ended in his domain. None could escape him, not even gods themselves. For when the old order crumbled and generations shifted, the underworld received them as surely as the grave receives kings. Thus the whispers of Olympus soften when they speak of him. They call him Pluton, giver of wealth, lord of hidden abundance. They murmur of his silence, his helm of invisibility, his impartial rule. Rarely do they say Hades, for the word itself carries the chill of finality. But whether silent or spoken, his presence remains, steady as the dark beneath the soil. He is the god of endings, yet also of beginnings, for from his realm rises the grain, and from his silence springs memory. To know him is to know that fear and wealth, death and life, are bound together. To honor him is to honor the truth that nothing is lost, only hidden, waiting in the shadows until the cycle turns once more. In the soft glow of twilight, when the fields shimmer with the gold of ripened grain, and the air carries the warm scent of earth, the presence of Demeter lingers, gentle yet profound. To the Greeks she was the goddess of harvest, the nourisher of mortals, the one who clothed bare soil in fertility and taught humankind the sacred art of cultivation. Yet like all the gods whose whispers echo upon Olympus, she bore many names, many guises, her face shifting with the needs of those who worshipped her. In the hymns that once rose from villages and sanctuaries, some were sung loud in festivals, while others, hushed and half forgotten, spoke of her sorrows, her wrath, and her hidden strength. These forgotten hymns remind us that Demeter was not only grain and abundance, but also shadow and mourning, both giver of life and guardian of death's mysteries. Her most enduring tale, woven into the fabric of the Eleusinian mysteries, told of the abduction of her daughter Persephone. In one bright morning, while the maiden gathered flowers in the meadows of Enna, the earth opened, and Hades ascended, carrying her into the depths below. Demeter's grief was immeasurable. She wandered the earth with torch in hand, her feet blistered, her robes torn, searching ceaselessly for her lost child. In her sorrow she withheld her gifts from humankind. Seeds refused to sprout, fields lay barren, famine spread across the earth, mortals starved, offerings ceased, and even the gods began to weaken without the smoke of sacrifice. It was only when Persephone was returned, half the year above with her mother, half the year below with her husband, that Demeter allowed the earth once more to bloom. Thus the seasons were born, the endless cycle of growth and decline, joy and mourning, spring and winter. This story is told in many voices, some bright with hope, others heavy with dread. To farmers, it was the assurance that winter's barrenness would yield to spring's abundance. To initiates of the mysteries, it was a promise that death itself was not the end. For just as Persephone returned, so too might the soul endure beyond the grave. In these rites, performed at Eleusis in utmost secrecy, worshippers walked blindfolded into darkness, then emerged into light, transformed by sacred words that were never written but only spoken. Demeter, in these hymns, was not only the mother of harvest but the teacher of mysteries, her torch guiding the soul beyond death. Yet the details of these hymns have been lost, silenced by the vow of secrecy, leaving only fragments, torches in the night, sacred grain, a cup of kykeon drunk in reverence. These forgotten songs remind us that her power was never confined to fields alone, but stretched into the hidden chambers of the soul. In Arcadia, she bore the name Demeter Erinis, the Fury, worshipped in a dark aspect, veiled and wrathful. Here, she was not the gentle nourisher but the avenger, a goddess whose face bore the marks of loss, whose voice was thunder when oaths were broken or sacred law betrayed. To stand before her image was to tremble, for she carried the duality of the earth itself, fertile when honoured, barren when defied. In Boeotia, she was Demeter Thesmophoros, bringer of law, worshipped in women's festivals where men were forbidden, her rites linked to fertility, marriage, and the hidden power of womanhood. The Thesmophoria, celebrated with secret offerings of pigs cast into pits and later retrieved as holy compost, echoed the cycle of decay and renewal, a ritual reminder that life springs from death. Here, her hymns were sung not in temples but in the voices of women, passing wisdom across generations, veiled from the eyes of men. Even in Athens, where her cult stood in grandeur beside that of Athena, her presence was not only bright. The Athenians honoured her as Chloe, the green shoot, tender and new, but also as Erinis, stern and grieving. They knew her both as the kindly mother who filled their granaries, and as the mourner who wandered with torches, reminding them of loss. To call upon Demeter was to call upon both faces, the gentle and the stern, for the earth that feeds is also the earth that buries. The forgotten hymns of Demeter tell us, too, of her role beyond the harvest. In Crete, she was linked to Rhea and to Gaia, remembered as an older earth goddess whose mantle later passed into Olympian form. Some whispered that she was once a goddess of the underworld, her grain growing from the soil of the dead, her torches guiding souls in darkness. Others merged her with Persephone herself, seeing mother and daughter not as two but as one, a single goddess of dual faces, life above and death below, seed and stalk, sprout and withered husk. In these whispers, Demeter was not merely mother, but cycle itself, an endless rhythm of concealment and return. And yet, to mortals, she was also tender. Farmers offered her first fruits of barley and wheat, children wove garlands of poppies, and mothers prayed for her protection during childbirth. To them, she was not distant but close, her gifts woven into every meal, every loaf of bread, every handful of grain. To forget her was to starve, to honour her was to live. Her presence was both ordinary and divine, filling the humblest table with the grandeur of Olympus. Even the bees that fed Zeus in his infancy were said to have been her gift, their honey a golden echo of the grain she nurtured. But what makes her most haunting are those hymns half-remembered, those whispers of rites never fully told. For Demeter is a goddess of silence as much as of speech, of secrets held close, of truths too sacred to be shared. The Eleusinian initiates carried her mysteries to their graves, never revealing the words that transformed them, and so we too are left with fragments, the torch in darkness, the grain sprouting from earth, the mother mourning her child. In these fragments lies her essence, as if the goddess herself demanded that she be known not in fullness but in glimpses, like stalks half hidden in mist. Thus the mountain whispers her names: Demeter Chloe, Demeter Thesmophoros, Demeter Erinis, Demeter Ceto, bringer of grain. She is the gentle mother and the wrathful avenger, the nourisher of mortals and the guardian of mysteries. To sing her hymns is to acknowledge not only the gift of harvest but also the inevitability of loss, the shadow that makes abundance precious. In her forgotten songs we find the truth of the earth itself, that life springs from death, that sorrow and joy entwine, that every field of golden grain is rooted in darkness below. When dawn breaks over the Aegean, and the first beams of gold touch the waves. The name of Apollo rises in the minds of mortals. To many, he was the shining archer, god of the sun, his arrows of light cutting through darkness. Yet, Apollo, like his siblings and forebears, was never only one thing. His many names, sung in hymns across temples and shrines, reveal a divinity of dual faces, bringer of harmony and sower of plague, prophet of truth and guardian of silence, healer of sickness and deliverer of death. Few gods wore their contradictions so openly, and fewer still shifted so gracefully between them. To speak of Apollo is to step into the tension of light and shadow, clarity and ambiguity, the eternal balance between what reveals and what blinds. In Delos, his birthplace, he was worshipped as the radiant child of Leto. The story tells of the goddess, weary and wandering, denied sanctuary by land and sea alike, until the floating island of Delos gave her refuge. There she gave birth to twins, Artemis, swift huntress of the wild, and Apollo, radiant archer whose cry filled the air with music. To honor him, the island flourished with temples, pilgrims arriving by boat to lay offerings at his altars. To these worshippers, he was Apollo Delios, god of light and purity, the one who scattered darkness with his glance. The hymns of Delos sang of his birth as dawn breaking, of his arrows shining, of his lyre bringing harmony to the world. Yet in Delphi, his presence bore another face. Here he was not merely radiant but oracular, seated above the navel of the world. The story tells how he slew the serpent Python, ancient guardian of the prophetic spring, and claimed the site as his own. From then on, the Pythia, his priestess, spoke his words in riddling verse, her breath infused with the vapors of the earth. Mortals came from every corner of Greece to seek his counsel, kings and peasants alike, each yearning for a glimpse of divine truth. Yet his prophecies were never simple. They bent like branches in the wind, offering guidance cloaked in ambiguity. For Apollo was not a god of plain speech, but of layered truth, where clarity and shadow walked hand in hand. To honor him at Delphi was to acknowledge that wisdom does not always come as a straight path, but as a twisting road that only the careful can follow. He was also Apollo Smintheus, the mouse god, protector and spreader of plague. At Troy, when the Greeks offended his priest, he loosed his arrows of pestilence, filling the air with death. Yet the same god who destroyed could also heal. Invoked as Apollo Pion, bringer of cures, his hymns rising in temples where the sick prayed for relief. This duality was not contradiction but truth. The same sun that gives life can also scorch. The same light that reveals can also blind. Apollo's face was never fixed, for he embodied the balance of nature itself, the delicate thread between life and death, blessing and curse. His lyre, gifted by Hermes, sang with sweetness that calmed the hearts of gods and mortals. In music he was the bringer of order, guiding the chorus of the muses, weaving harmony into chaos. Festivals in his honor filled the air with song and dance, as if the god himself played among them, uniting city and soul. Yet his music could also wound. The story of Marsyas tells of the satyr who challenged Apollo with his flute, only to be flayed alive for his hubris. Here the god's light revealed cruelty, his perfection demanding obedience, his beauty intolerant of rival song. Apollo, radiant though he was, bore the sharp edge of pride, and those who drew too near his brilliance risked destruction. In art and hymn he bore countless epithets: Apollo Phoebos, the bright one; Apollo Musagetes, leader of the muses; Apollo Hekatos, far shooter; Apollo Nomios, protector of flocks; Apollo Karneos, worshipped in Sparta with rites that mingled war and fertility. Each title was a facet, each shrine a reflection of his vastness. He was never bound to a single role, for his power stretched across prophecy, music, plague, healing, law, and the sun itself. To some he was a youthful archer, forever golden and untouchable. To others he was a stern lawgiver, exacting obedience with the sharpness of his gaze. To still others he was a companion in healing, invoked with prayers of relief and thanksgiving. Even his role as sun god was never simple, for in early times Helios bore the chariot of the sun, distinct from Apollo's radiant arrows. Yet over centuries their names entwined, the god of prophecy becoming the god of light, until the two were often indistinguishable. To call upon Apollo was to call upon the sun itself, its warmth and brilliance, its danger and fire. And in that fusion, his dual nature was only deepened, for the sun nourishes and destroys, comforts and blinds. Apollo's identity, like the dawn, was always layered, both clarity and glare. Mortals revered him not only for his brilliance but for his closeness. His oracles shaped the fates of cities, his music lifted the souls of the weary, his arrows struck down those who defied the sacred order. He was a god who walked near, whose presence was felt in the warmth of the sun on skin, in the sound of music in the air, in the dread silence of plague. Yet his nearness was never fully safe, for his light could not be approached without risk. To know Apollo was to know the double-edged gift of beauty, that it inspires and wounds, that it uplifts and destroys. The whispers of Olympus speak of him with awe, but also with caution. Apollo, radiant archer, lord of light, prophet of riddles, healer and destroyer, musician and avenger. His names shift like the chords of his lyre, sometimes sweet, sometimes sharp, always changing, always present. To sing his hymn is to stand in the tension of opposites, to accept that divinity is never simple. He is both dawn and dusk, both harmony and discord, both blessing and curse. And in his shifting faces, mortals glimpse not contradiction but truth, that the divine, like the sun, can never be held in one light alone. If Apollo was the radiance of sun and song, his twin sister Artemis was the cool light of the moon, the sharp whisper of the bowstring in the forest, the silent tread of a goddess who belonged not to hearth or city but to the wild itself. Yet like her brother, she was never a single, simple image. She bore many souls, many masks, each worshipper seeing in her what they most feared, longed for, or sought to appease. To some she was the virgin huntress, forever young, running free with her band of nymphs, her laughter echoing among oaks and mountain crags. To others she was the moon itself, a celestial mother guiding tides and cycles. To others still she was the dread mistress of childbirth and sudden death, a goddess who could guard a woman in her hour of labor, or strike her down without mercy. Artemis was at once protector and destroyer, maiden and mother, light and shadow. To call upon her name was to touch the wildness that lies beyond human control, the untamed essence of nature itself. Her story began, like Apollo's, in the labor of Leto on the wandering island of Delos. Yet Artemis, it is said, was born first, and in some hymns she aided her mother in the birth of her brother, already midwife, though still a child herself. From this moment she was linked to childbirth, invoked as a helper to women, though her aid was never guaranteed. In some places she was worshipped as Artemis Eileithyia, a goddess of safe delivery, while in others she was feared as Artemis Lochia, who could withhold her mercy and bring death in the very moment of new life. Thus, even in her earliest role, her face is divided, guardian of birth and harbinger of its shadow. In the forests she was Artemis Agrotera, the huntress, swift of foot, bow in hand, accompanied by her hounds and her nymphs. Here she was virgin, untouchable, demanding the same purity of those who followed her. Actaeon learned this truth when he stumbled upon her bathing. In wrath she transformed him into a stag, and his own hounds tore him apart. This tale, repeated in hushed tones, was not merely warning of her anger, but revelation of her essence. Artemis was not to be gazed upon as object, for she was the wild itself, inviolate, sovereign, untamed. In this face she represented freedom, the wildness beyond walls, the life that does not bow to marriage, hearth, or husband. And yet she was also a goddess of the city. In Athens she was Artemis Brauronia, honoured by maidens who danced in bare costume, symbolizing their transition into womanhood. Here she presided over the threshold between childhood and maturity, guiding girls as they shed innocence and stepped toward their roles as wives and mothers. In Sparta she was Artemis Orthia, worshipped in rites of endurance and discipline, where youths were whipped before her altar as test of their strength. In these civic faces, Artemis was no longer only forest maiden but guardian of transition, shaping the lives of mortals at their most pivotal moments. The moon bound her to cycles greater than human life. As Artemis Selene, she was merged with the shining orb that governed tides and time, her silver face gazing down on the earth each night. Her phases mirrored the rhythms of women's lives, her waxing and waning bound to fertility, menstruation, and renewal. In some traditions, she became Hecate, the triple goddess of crossroads and magic, who bore the torches of night and ruled over ghosts and spells. In this guise, Artemis was not only light but darkness, her soul extending into the underworld, her face haunting thresholds where mortals hesitated in fear. The many-souled goddess revealed herself as a spectrum, maiden of dawn, huntress of day, moon of night, and shadow of death. Her connection to sacrifice also revealed her duality. In Aulis, as the Greek fleet prepared to sail for Troy, the seer declared that Artemis demanded the life of Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia, to calm the winds. In one telling, she was appeased, and Iphigenia slain. In another, the goddess spared the girl, replacing her with a deer and whisking her away to become her priestess in Tauris. Here, Artemis appeared both merciless and merciful, destroyer of life and savior of innocence, her will inscrutable, her power absolute. For Artemis was not a goddess to be tamed by mortal morality. She was the wild, both nurturing and deadly, and mortals stood at her mercy. Her symbols stag, bow, hound, moon shifted in meaning across regions. In Asia Minor, she was Artemis of Ephesus, the great mother figure, adorned with many breasts, worshipped not as virgin but as fertility incarnate. Pilgrims gazed upon her towering statue, her body heavy with symbols of abundance, and saw not the huntress but the all-nurturing mother of life. This face of Artemis seemed wholly at odds with the Greek maiden of the forest, yet both were her. She was at once untouched virgin and fertile mother, embodying contradictions without need to resolve them. The whispers of Olympus tell of her in many voices: Artemis Agritera, the huntress; Artemis Brauronia, the guardian of maidens; Artemis Orthia, the stern goddess of discipline; Artemis Selene, the moon's silver glow; Artemis of Ephesus, mother of abundance; Artemis Lochia, the midwife and the death-bringer. Each epithet, each shrine, each ritual reveals another soul, another mask, another truth. She is not one goddess but many, her essence as untamed as the forest, as cyclical as the moon, as inexorable as the passage from birth to death. To know Artemis is to know the many-souled nature of divinity itself, that the sacred cannot be contained in one role, one face, one story. She is the maiden who runs free, and the mother who nurses life, the light that guides and the shadow that frightens. In her multiplicity, mortals glimpse the wildness of existence, the cycles of growth and decay, the mystery of thresholds that no one can avoid. And so, when the mountain whispers her name, it does so with reverence and caution, for Artemis is everywhere, in the forest's silence, in the silver light of the moon, in the cry of a woman in labor, in the sudden stillness of death. She is Artemis, the many-souled, the untamed, the eternal. When the clamor of war and the hush of councils filled the air of Greece, there rose a goddess whose presence was both stern and wise, radiant and measured, a figure born not from the softness of womb or cradle, but from the mind of Zeus himself. Athena sprang fully armed from her father's head, her cry a thunderclap, her spear gleaming, her shield emblazoned with the terror of the Gorgon's face. She was unique among the immortals, neither wife nor mother, neither wholly fierce nor wholly gentle, but a harmony of opposites, maiden and warrior, strategist and artisan, guardian of cities and whisperer of crafts. Yet like all divinities whose whispers drift across Olympus, Athena was not confined to one image. She bore many names, each woven into the fabric of the cities that honored her, each a thread revealing another aspect of her essence. In Athens, the city that bore her name, she was Athena Polias, protector of the polis, guardian of its walls and its people. The Parthenon, gleaming with marble, rose as her shrine, housing her great statue of ivory and gold, her spear point gleaming high enough to be seen by sailors approaching from afar. Here she was honored with the Panathenaic festival, where processions wound through the city streets, offerings were laid at her feet, and a woven robe, the peplos, was presented to her image each year. The robe itself bore stories of gods and heroes, as though to remind mortals that she was both weaver of cloth and weaver of destiny. In Athens, she embodied wisdom, strategy, and civic order, her name bound forever to the flourishing of democracy and art. But beyond Athens, her names shifted. In Sparta, she was Athena Chalkioikos, goddess of the bronze house, her temple echoing with the clang of armor, her worship stern and martial. Here she was, no patroness of councils or artists, but a spirit of discipline and strength, invoked by warriors who marched to battle in her name. In Rhodes, she was Athena Lindia, honored in great sanctuaries overlooking the sea, her presence mingling with maritime power and distant horizons. In Arcadia, she was Athena Alea, a goddess whose temple rivaled even the grandeur of Athens, where she was invoked not only as warrior, but as healer and protectress. Each region wove her name into its own needs, seeing in her what mattered most, and each face was true, each mask a thread in her endless weaving. Athena was not only goddess of war, but of its restraint. Unlike Ares, who reveled in bloodlust and chaos, she embodied strategy, discipline, the mind that guided the spear. She was invoked by generals who sought not slaughter, but victory through cunning and order. In Homer's epics, she walked beside Odysseus, guiding him with counsel, shielding him with wisdom, weaving plans that saved him from ruin. She whispered, not through the clash of battle, but through the clarity of thought, the calm that sees the path when all else is noise. Thus she was Athena Glaucopis, owl-eyed, her gaze keen and steady, her wisdom sharp as the talons of her sacred bird. The owl, nocturnal yet watchful, became her emblem, a reminder that wisdom is not the absence of darkness, but the ability to see through it. She was also a goddess of craft, protector of artisans, patron of weaving, pottery, and skill. In this face, she bore the title Athena Ergane, guardian of workers, invoked by those who shaped clay, carved wood, or wove thread into pattern. Her rivalry with Arachne revealed her dual nature. When the mortal maiden wove tapestries rivaling the gods themselves, Athena struck her down, yet in pity transformed her into a spider, weaving forever. This story, both stern and merciful, revealed the goddess's essence. Mastery is sacred, but hubris before the divine is perilous. Athena cherished skill but demanded reverence, reminding mortals that their crafts were echoes of divine art. In some hymns she bore gentler faces. Athena Sotera, savior, protector of cities in crisis. Athena Hygeia, linked to health and well-being. Athena Promachos, she who fights at the front, leading warriors into battle. Each epithet reflected the breadth of her presence, shifting with the prayers of those who called upon her. To a craftsman, she was the quiet guide of hands. To a soldier, she was the gleaming shield. To a statesman, she was the voice of clarity and counsel. To a mother, she was the protector of the hearth, through the safety of the city's walls. And yet, for all her faces, Athena remained maiden, Parthenos, untouched by marriage or motherhood. Her virginity was not fragility but sovereignty, a declaration of independence from bonds that defined many other goddesses. She belonged to no one, her authority her own, her wisdom unshackled. This, too, was her paradox. She was feminine yet beyond the roles mortals prescribed to women, embodying both nurture and command, softness and steel. Her virginity was itself a mask, a statement of autonomy, making her the eternal maiden who yet mothered cities, the goddess who bore no children but whose wisdom gave birth to order itself. In the whispers of Olympus, Athena is the weaver of names, her essence revealed not in one mask but in the tapestry of many. Athena Polias, guardian of cities. Athena Parthenos, virgin sovereign. Athena Glaucopis, owl-eyed. Athena Ergane, patroness of craft. Athena Chalkioikos, goddess of bronze. Each epithet is a thread, and together they weave the fabric of her divinity. To worship her is to see her not as one, but as many, not as statue, but as tapestry. Her presence spread across war and peace, craft and counsel, wisdom and strength. She was born from thought, from the head of Zeus, and so she embodies the truth that divinity is not only power, but mind, not only thunder, but wisdom. Her many names remind mortals that clarity itself has many forms: the sharpness of strategy, the patience of craft, the watchfulness of an owl, the strength of a shield, the calm of counsel. In Athena's faces, mortals glimpse the possibility of harmony between opposites, a weaving of strength and wisdom, war and peace, thought and action. And so the mountain whispers her names, soft yet steady, like the sound of thread sliding through a loom. Athena, owl-eyed, city guardian, weaver of names. Her tapestry remains unfinished, for each generation adds its own thread, each city its own hymn, each craft its own prayer. She is the goddess of weaving, not only cloth but identity, not only walls but memory, her presence binding the scattered threads of human life into a fabric strong enough to endure. Among the Olympians who sat upon thrones of marble and cloud, crowned in gold and lightning, there was one who never quite belonged, a god who came late, who arrived not as ruler but as outsider, not as sovereign but as wanderer. Dionysus, son of Zeus and of mortal Samael, was born in paradox and lived in multiplicity, a god whose essence was strangeness, whose power was always foreign, always new, always reborn. He was the god of wine, of ecstasy, of frenzy, and of theatre, but also of death and rebirth. His story told in countless masks, his name whispered in countless epithets. To mortals he was liberator and terror, joy-bringer and destroyer, intimate companion and stranger at the gate. He was a god of contradiction, a shifting presence that slipped through categories, refusing to be fixed, and in that refusal lay his power. His birth itself was strange, told in many voices. Semele, mortal daughter of Cadmus, was courted by Zeus, who came to her in secrecy. When Hera, queen of heaven, learned of this union, she came in disguise, whispering doubt into Semele's ear, persuading her to ask Zeus to reveal himself in his full divinity. Bound by oath, Zeus appeared in lightning and fire, and Semele, unable to bear the blaze, was consumed. Yet in the instant of her death, Zeus plucked the child from her womb and sewed him into his own thigh, carrying him until he was ready to be born. Thus Dionysus was called Demeter twice born. His first birth ended in destruction, his second brought him forth as immortal. In this beginning lay his essence, life from death, rebirth from ashes, joy mingled with grief. Even as a child, Dionysus bore strangeness. Some stories say Hermes carried him away to be raised by nymphs in the glades of Nysa, a place no one could ever quite locate, always distant, always foreign. Others claimed he was sheltered by Ino, sister of Semele, and her husband Athamas, until Hera in her wrath drove them mad. In some hymns, Zeus turned the infant into a kid, hiding him from Hera's gaze. In each telling, the theme repeats. Dionysus is hidden, protected, disguised, always on the edge of exile, always a stranger in the house of the gods. Unlike Zeus, Athena, or Apollo, he did not claim his throne with thunder or prophecy, but with wandering, with persistence, with the strangeness of a god who comes from elsewhere. His arrival among mortals was always accompanied by wine, by the vine that crept along hillsides and transformed water into intoxication. To drink in his presence was to taste liberation, to feel the loosening of bonds, the breaking of barriers. Women, often confined within walls and duties, became maenads in his train, leaving hearth and loom behind to dance in forests, their hair unbound, their hands bearing thyrsoy wrapped in ivy. They sang his hymns with ecstatic cries, their feet stamping rhythms that shook the earth. To some, this was liberation, a gift that released them from the weight of law and custom. To others, it was terror, for in their frenzy maenads could tear beasts apart with their hands, and those who resisted the god's power often met destruction. Dionysus was joy and madness, blessing and curse, a god whose presence was never safe, but always transformative. In Thebes, his mother's city, his strangeness was most keenly felt. Pentheus, king of Thebes, refused to honor him, declaring him false and mocking the rites that spread through his land. Dionysus came in disguise, a soft-spoken stranger, and lured Pentheus into spying upon the Maenads. Dressed in women's garb, the king crept to the mountains, only to be torn apart by his own mother and aunts in their frenzy, believing him a wild beast. This myth, told in Euripides' Bacchae, revealed the god's essence. Resist him, and madness will consume you. Accept him, and ecstasy will free you. Dionysus demanded recognition, not of his throne, but of his strangeness, his refusal to be contained within the boundaries of law and reason. Yet Dionysus was not only frenzy, he was also theatre, the god of masks and play, of roles assumed and identities shed. In Athens, his festivals gave birth to tragedy and comedy, the stage itself becoming his temple. Actors wore masks, voices echoed through choruses, and mortals stepped into stories greater than themselves. Here Dionysus revealed another face, not destruction but transformation, not frenzy but catharsis, where laughter and tears mingled, and the soul was changed. To honor him in theatre was to acknowledge that identity itself is a mask, shifting as easily as his own, that truth is found not in singularity but in performance, in the dance of many faces. His epithets reveal the breadth of his nature. Dionysus Eleutherios, liberator, freeing mortals from fear. Dionysus Bromios, roaring, his presence like thunder in the night. Dionysus Zagreus, in Orphic tradition, a child torn apart by titans and reborn, symbol of the soul's immortality. Dionysus Dendrites, of the trees, worshipped in rustic groves. Dionysus Lysios, the releaser, who unbinds both body and spirit. Each name is a mask, a fragment of his essence, yet together they reveal his truth. He is always the stranger, always the reborn, always the one who breaks boundaries and creates anew. Even among the Olympians, his place was uncertain. Some lists include him among the 12, others exclude him, replacing him with Hestia or Hades. This uncertainty itself speaks to his essence. He is both in and out, both Olympian and foreigner, both god and stranger. His thyrsus, wound with ivy, stood among thunderbolts and tridents, yet it always seemed out of place, as if reminding the gods themselves that order is never absolute, that strangeness always intrudes, and yet his power could not be denied. Where he walked, vines grew, hearts were unbound, souls were changed. The whispers of Olympus speak his name with a kind of unease, for he is never fixed, never predictable. Dionysus, the stranger, the twice-born, the liberator, the destroyer, the actor, the mad god, the saviour of souls. To some he is joy, to others terror, but to all he is transformation. He is the face that is always new, the god who is always foreign, always coming from elsewhere, always arriving again. To honour him is to accept that life itself is change, that identity is a mask, that death is followed by rebirth, that joy and sorrow intertwine. Thus the cycle of gods and names circles back to him, the last yet not the least, the god who is never at rest. His hymn is always beginning, always new, always strange, and in his strangeness lies the eternal truth of Olympus, that the gods are never one, never simple, but shifting, many-named, many-faced, their whispers carried like the rustle of leaves, like the ripple of wine, like the laughter and tears that flow in the same breath. Though Olympus gleamed with the victory of Zeus and his kin, the shadows of older gods did not vanish. Beneath the marble brightness lingered murmurs of titans, primordial beings, and chthonic presences whose names were once sung in fear and reverence. The Olympians sat enthroned in temples, but beneath the soil and in hidden valleys, offerings still smouldered for powers that came before. These forgotten gods did not disappear. They shifted, concealed themselves, lived on in whispers, in secret rites, in names disguised beneath Olympian masks. For the divine is never silenced, it only changes its face. In Arcadia, the rugged land of shepherds and streams, Zeus himself was worshipped not as thunderer, but as Zeus Lycaios, wolf god of the mountain. Here, in rites older than Athens, shadows of sacrifice clung to his name. Some whispered of human offerings, of boys who vanished into the forest and returned as wolves, embodiments of primal savagery. This was no shining Olympios, no cloud-gatherer, but a darker figure, echo of the wild power that gods bore before marble and temple tamed them. Even as Olympus rose, this older face endured, a reminder that beneath the crown of thunder lies a god of fang and shadow. Elsewhere, Cronus too survived, not as devourer, but as kindly spirit of abundance. In Attica, during the festival of Cronia, masters and slaves feasted together, remembering the golden age when all were equal. The chains of Tartarus did not erase him. They only softened his image, transformed terror into nostalgia. So too Rhea lingered, not only as Olympian mother but as mountain goddess, her name spoken in Cretan caves with drums and ecstatic dances. She was remembered as Cybele in Phrygia, seated on a lion-drawn chariot, crowned with towers, her worship fierce and wild. Thus the mother of gods endured beyond Olympus, her echoes carried into foreign lands. Even the primordial deities, those born of chaos and night, continued to breathe in the shadows. Nyx, night herself, was honored in hushed invocations, her name carved into oracles as a power older than Zeus. Thanatos, gentle death, and Hypnos, sleep, were called upon as brothers whose embrace ended suffering. Hecate, goddess of crossroads, torches in hand, moved between realms of night and shadow, her worship spreading in secrecy, her name invoked by witches and wanderers alike. These figures, never crowned in Olympus, remained vital presences in the imaginations of mortals, powers too deep to vanish. In rural sanctuaries, where shepherds tended flocks and farmers sowed seed, the gods were remembered not as shining Olympians, but as earthbound spirits. Springs were dedicated to nymphs, groves to Pan, shrines to rustic deities whose laughter mingled with the rustle of leaves. Pan himself, goat-footed and wild, played his pipes in Arcadian valleys, striking both joy and terror in the hearts of those who heard him. His name was never carved into the great temples, yet his presence was felt more intimately than Zeus's thunder, for he was the god who startled mortals in lonely woods, whose panic could grip the soul without warning. Thus the forgotten gods lived on not in marble but in the trembling of leaves, the silence of twilight, the sudden cry in the night. Even within the Olympians themselves, the old faces remained hidden. Hera's queenly majesty concealed her earlier role as earth goddess of fertility, linked to cycles of growth and decay. Demeter's golden grain bore beneath it the shadow of older chthonic rites, where piglets were cast into pits as offerings to the soil. Artemis, virgin huntress, carried in Asia Minor the form of a great mother goddess, breasts many, her body carved with symbols of abundance. Apollo's shining face absorbed the older Helios, the sun itself. Each Olympian was not new but layered, their thrones built upon older shrines, their names clothed in fresh masks but rooted in shadows. The whispers of Olympus do not deny these forgotten gods. They carry them still. Every thunderbolt recalls the sickle of Cronus. Every marriage rite of Hera remembers the fertility goddess behind her diadem. Every torch of Demeter carries the flame of older mysteries. Every howl of Artemis's hounds recalls the wildness of night mothers, once prayed to in fear. The Olympians won, but their victory was never complete. The old gods live on beneath them, beneath the soil, beneath memory, in hymns forgotten, yet never silenced. Thus, when night falls upon the mountain and the mists coil like smoke, one can almost hear the echoes of names not spoken in temples but murmured in secret. Cronus, the king of shadows, Rhea, the mountain mother, Nyx of the endless night, Pan of the wild pipes. They are not gone, they are waiting, hidden in the folds of memory, in the cracks of stone, in the silence between words. And so Olympus, though bright and triumphant, remains haunted by the gods it sought to replace, gods who whisper still, reminding mortals that no victory erases what came before. When the rites of Olympus were sung in open air, with processions of garlands and sacrifices for all to see, another current flowed beneath the surface, quiet and hidden, carried not by priests of marble temples, but by wandering singers and secret initiates. These were the Orphics, keepers of hymns whispered in twilight, songs attributed to Orpheus, the poet who charmed all living things with his lyre and descended into Hades for love. His followers carried his voice beyond the threshold of common worship, shaping mysteries that spoke of death and rebirth, of the soul's journey beyond the grave, of a cosmos where Dionysus himself was torn and reborn. In their songs, the gods wore masks even stranger than in Homer's epics, and their names were wrapped in allegory, each revealing a secret not meant for every ear. The Orphic hymns told of beginnings older than Olympus, of a cosmic egg that cracked open to reveal Phanes, a god of shining light, and of Nyx, night eternal, who ruled over prophecy. From their union, the world unfolded, and in its cycles lay the truth that all things are born, die, and return. The Orphics saw in Zeus not only king of gods but the cosmos itself, swallowing Phanes and all creation to bring forth a new order from his own body. This was not the thunderer of Homer but a deeper Zeus, one who contained within him the cycle of everything, birth and dissolution, light and darkness, all woven into his being. His name in their hymns was not merely Zeus Olympios, but Zeus is the head, Zeus is the middle. From Zeus all things are born. But it was Dionysus, more than any, who stood at the heart of Orphic mystery. In their telling, he was Zagreus, child of Persephone and Zeus, destined to inherit the cosmos. Yet the Titans, jealous and enraged, lured the child with toys, then tore him to pieces, devouring his flesh. Athena, in pity, rescued his heart, which Zeus swallowed, bringing Dionysus to rebirth through Semele. Thus he was twice born, torn apart and remade, his essence embodying the cycle of death and return. In this myth lay the secret of the soul, that it, too, was torn and scattered, bound to the body like to tangent ash, yet capable of rebirth through purification, capable of returning to divine unity. The Orphics lived by these truths, guiding their lives by rules both strange and solemn. They abstained from eating flesh, believing it bound them to the Titans' crime, their very bodies remnants of the ancient sin. They carried with them golden tablets, small thin sheets inscribed with instructions for the soul after death, which springs to drink from, which paths to avoid, what words to speak to the guardians of the underworld. These tablets, buried with the dead, whispered of a journey beyond the grave, a road where the soul might escape the endless wheel of rebirth and join the blessed with Dionysus in eternal light. In their hymns, gods were not simply beings to be honored with sacrifice, but cosmic principles to be meditated upon. Demeter was not only grain but the cycle of decay and renewal. Persephone was not only queen of the dead but the soul's descent into matter and its hope of return. Hades was not only ruler of shadows but the gate through which every soul must pass, his name both fear and promise. The Olympians of Orphic song were both themselves and more, their names symbols of truths hidden beneath myth. To sing Apollo was to invoke not only light but harmony of the soul. To sing Dionysus was to invoke not only ecstasy but the mystery of rebirth. These songs were not sung for all ears. They were whispered in caves, in secret gatherings, in initiations veiled from common eyes. To be Orphic was to step aside from the life of the polis, to carry a sacred burden of knowledge. Their hymns spoke in riddles, their truths concealed in metaphor, for to reveal them openly was to risk their power. And so much of what they knew is lost to us, fragments scattered like Zagreus himself, leaving us only hints, a golden tablet, a hymn preserved in scraps, a story retold by later poets. Yet even these fragments carry weight, for they reveal that beneath the open worship of Olympus, mortals sought deeper answers, sought not only the favor of gods in life, but the promise of salvation in death. And still, their voices echo in the silence. The Orphic hymns that remain speak in tones of reverence, each line beginning with an invocation, each name of the god a doorway into hidden truth. Tonight, mother of gods and men, to Persephone, dread queen of the underworld, to Dionysus, twice born, revealer of mysteries. Each hymn reminds us that the gods are not only rulers of realms, but symbols of the soul's path, that their many names are not only masks, but keys to understanding. Thus, the whispers of Olympus carry also the whispers of Orpheus. They tell of songs sung in shadows, of mysteries hidden beneath common worship, of gods whose faces reveal truths beyond mortal sight. They remind us that the divine is never only what it seems, that behind the thunder of Zeus and the hunt of Artemis lies another layer, deeper and stranger, where myth becomes philosophy and story becomes salvation. In the Orphic songs, the gods are eternal, shifting, reborn in every soul that seeks them. And though much of their hymn is forgotten, its essence endures, that death is not the end, that the soul is more than flesh, that the gods wear many faces because truth itself is many-faced. The gods of Greece, though enthroned on Olympus, did not remain within the boundaries of Hellas. Their names travelled with sailors, their images carried by merchants, their rites mingled with those of other peoples. And as they moved across seas and frontiers, their faces shifted again, blending with foreign deities, merging with older spirits, wearing new masks. The divine, like a river, never flowed in one channel. It branched, joined others, and carried with it the silt of many lands. To understand the Greek gods is to see not statues fixed in marble, but flowing currents, each region reshaping their identities into new forms that were both familiar and strange. In Egypt, where temples rose vast and eternal against the desert sky, the Greeks found gods older than their own. When Alexander's successors carved out kingdoms, the blending of pantheons was inevitable. Zeus became linked to Amun, the ram-headed lord of Thebes, whose hidden essence resonated with Zeus's role as cloud-gatherer and sovereign. Together they became Zeus-Ammon, worshipped in the great oracle at Siwa, where even Alexander himself sought counsel. Here the thunderer wore the horns of a ram, his face transformed by desert sands, his name speaking in two tongues at once. Greeks bowed to him as Olympios, Egyptians as Amun, yet both recognized in him the same majesty. Isis, the Egyptian goddess of magic, motherhood, and the throne, became entwined with Demeter and with Hera, her maternal and sovereign qualities resonating with both. Her cult spread into Greece and beyond, and soon temples to Isis rose in Piraeus and Delos, her statues adorned with Greek robes but carrying Egyptian sistrums in hand. In her face, mortals saw Demeter's mourning for Persephone, Hera's majesty, and the nurturing care of countless mother goddesses. To call upon her was to call upon many, a reminder that divinity knew no borders, that names shifted but power endured. In Asia Minor, Artemis transformed. In Ephesus, she was not the huntress maiden of Greece but the great mother, Artemis, Ephesia, her statue covered with countless breasts or gourds, symbols of fertility and abundance. Pilgrims from every land gazed upon her towering image, seeing in her not virginity but the fullness of life, a goddess whose body itself bore the weight of creation. This Artemis bore little resemblance to the bow-wielding maiden of Arcadia, yet she was the same in name, another mask of the many-souled goddess. To the Greeks, this was strange, foreign, yet undeniable, for the goddess revealed herself in forms suited to every land. In Thrace and Phrygia, Dionysus mingled with Sabazios, a rider god whose hand gesture blessed and protected. Their rites fused in wild dances, ecstatic hymns, and symbols of snakes and vines. Dionysus, already the stranger, became stranger still, his presence foreign even within Greece, his cult carrying whispers of Asia in every drumbeat and cry. To the Romans he became Bacchus, his festivals spreading through the empire, his rites both celebrated and suppressed for their frenzy. Yet whether called Dionysus, Bacchus, or Sabazios, he remained the same, the god of liberation, of masks, of ecstasy and rebirth. Athena too travelled, her wisdom merging with Minerva of Rome, a goddess of strategy, craft, and state. Yet where Athena remained virgin maiden, Minerva softened into more civic roles, her temples adorning forums, her name invoked in the calm governance of law. The Romans saw in her less the warrior virgin and more the guiding hand of order, reshaping her into a gentler, more practical face. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune, Hades became Pluto, all names reshaped, softened, or sharpened by the Roman tongue. Their temples were rebuilt in marble, their festivals codified in Roman law, their faces familiar yet altered. The Olympians had crossed the sea, but in doing so, they became Roman, their Greek whispers mingling with Latin echoes. Even further, in the blending of Hellenistic thought, gods became more than personal beings. They became universal principles. Philosophers spoke of Zeus as Logos, the rational order of the cosmos. They saw in Apollo not merely a god of prophecy, but the harmony of number and proportion. They spoke of Demeter and Persephone as allegories for the soul's descent into matter and its return. In this way, the gods' many names became not only cultic but philosophical, their shifting faces mirrors of thought itself. Yet for all their changes, their essence remained. A Greek sailor in Alexandria who prayed to Zeus Ammon did not think himself forsaking Olympus. He recognized in the ram-horned oracle the same father of gods he had known on his native shore. A Roman farmer pouring wine to Bacchus did not imagine a foreign deity but the same liberator of vines and joy. A pilgrim at Ephesus did not deny the Artemis of Delos, but honored her in another guise. The gods wore masks, but the masks were doors, not barriers. Behind each face was the same presence, shifting to meet the needs of those who called. The whispers of Olympus grew louder as they mingled with whispers of Nile and Tiber, of Phrygian hills and Asian valleys. They told of gods who are never confined to one land, who travel with mortals, who change their names as easily as clouds change their shapes. They remind us that divinity is not still but flowing, not fixed but ever shifting, its truth refracted through many tongues, many faces, many songs. To look upon Zeus Ammon, Artemis Ephesia, or Dionysus Bacchus is to see the same truth clothed in foreign robes. The gods, like rivers, carry many names, but all return to the sea. Though enthroned on Olympus, robed in light and crowned with power, the gods of Greece were never bound only to the sky. Again and again the myths tell of their descent, their disguises, their wanderings upon the earth in mortal form. They were not only distant sovereigns, but travellers who tested hospitality, who slipped unseen into households, who revealed themselves in moments both wondrous and terrible. This, too, was part of their shifting essence. They were not always radiant, not always terrible, but sometimes humble, cloaked in rags, their divinity veiled in ordinariness. In these stories, mortals learned that the divine might appear at any door, that every stranger might conceal a god. Zeus himself, king of gods, bore many disguises when he walked among mortals. Most were for desire, his transformations into swan, bull, golden rain. Yet he also moved in humbler forms, testing the bonds of Xenia, the sacred law of hospitality. With Hermes at his side, he entered villages disguised as travellers, weary and poor. In the story told of Philemon and Baucis, an aged couple in Phrygia, Zeus and Hermes knocked upon many doors seeking shelter. All turned them away but the old pair, who welcomed them with meagre food and humble kindness. In reward, the gods transformed their hut into a temple, granting them life until they could die together as intertwining trees. Here Zeus was not thunderer but guest, Hermes not herald but wanderer, and the story taught that to honour strangers was to honour gods, for the divine often hides in human form. Hermes himself, fleet-footed and sly, was the god most often to appear disguised. As traveller, beggar, or shepherd, he slipped unnoticed among mortals, guiding souls, delivering messages, tricking and teaching in equal measure. His very essence was boundary crossing, and his presence in human form reminded mortals that the line between God and man was never absolute. To welcome Hermes in disguise was to welcome wit, chance, and fortune. To turn him away was to risk trickery or loss. He embodied the uncertainty of every meeting with the unknown, the truth that every stranger bears possibility of blessing or curse. Other gods, too, cloaked themselves. Demeter, in her sorrow for Persephone, wandered the earth disguised as an old woman. In Eleusis, she came to the household of King Celeus, sitting by the well in the guise of a nurse. When welcomed, she offered to raise the king's infant son, and each night she anointed him with ambrosia and placed him in the fire, intending to make him immortal. But when the queen discovered this and cried out in fear, Demeter revealed herself in her majesty, her radiance filling the hall, demanding a temple in her honour. Thus the Eleusinian mysteries began, born of the goddess's time in mortal form. In this guise she taught that divinity walks quietly among the humble, that a guest by the well may be more than she appears. Athena, too, was known for her disguises. She often appeared as mentor, guide to Odysseus's son Telemachus, offering wisdom not as a radiant goddess but as a trusted friend. Her voice, calm and practical, carried the weight of divine insight through the appearance of a mere man. In this way, she reminded mortals that guidance may come from ordinary lips, that wisdom does not always shine with visible majesty, but may dwell in familiar form. Her disguises taught trust in counsel, in companionship, in the ordinary as vessel of the divine. Even Dionysus, god of ecstasy, arrived most often as stranger. In Thebes he appeared as a soft-spoken foreigner, robes trailing, hair unbound, claiming to bring new rights. His mildness deceived Pentheus, who mocked him, only to be lured into madness and torn apart. In his disguises, Dionysus was always outsider, guest, traveller, the god who comes from elsewhere. His strangeness revealed the truth that the divine is never wholly at home, never fully familiar, always arriving anew in unexpected guise. These tales were not idle stories but mirrors of belief. The Greeks saw in them a lesson, that hospitality was sacred, that every stranger deserved honour, for the gods might be walking the road in disguise. A loaf of bread offered, a seat by the fire, a jar of wine shared. These were not merely kindnesses to mortals but offerings to gods unseen. To reject a wanderer was to risk rejecting Zeus Xenios, guardian of guests, or Hermes, god of wayfarers, or Demeter, seeking comfort in grief. The law of Xenia bound all Greeks not only to each other but to the divine, for the gods themselves practiced it, walking as mortals to test the hearts of humankind. The whispers of Olympus recall these disguises with quiet reverence. They tell of old couples whose huts became temples, of children nearly made immortal by the touch of a guest, of kings undone by mocking strangers. They remind us that divinity is not always radiant, that it hides as often as it shines, that the true test of reverence lies not in temples, but in thresholds, in doorways, in the simple act of welcome. For the gods who walk as mortals teach that the sacred is always near, that the stranger on the road may bear eternity beneath their cloak. And so the mountain whispers, "Beware and be kind," for the divine wears many faces, and sometimes the face is your neighbours, sometimes a beggar's, sometimes your friend's. The gods are never only on Olympus. They are here, walking, testing, revealing themselves in silence. Their disguises are not deceptions but lessons, reminding mortals that the divine dwells not only in thunder and temple but in the humble and the everyday. To welcome the stranger is to welcome the god, and to turn them away is to turn away the sacred itself. When the hymns faded and the festivals ended, when the smoke of sacrifice drifted upward into the cold night air, there remained the silence of the mountain. Olympus, crowned in mist, still whispered, but those whispers grew faint as centuries passed. The gods who once strode across earth and sky, whose names rang through valleys and cities, began to fade, not into nothingness but into memory. Their temples crumbled, their statues toppled, their rites gave way to new prayers, but their presence lingered, softer now, carried not in thunder, but in echoes. The silence beyond Olympus is not absence but transformation, the way a voice becomes an echo when distance stretches between speaker and listener. Mortals changed, and with them the names of gods changed too. In Rome, Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Athena became Minerva, Poseidon became Neptune. Their stories were told anew, reshaped by Latin tongues, their festivals woven into the fabric of empire. Then came other names, other prayers, other faiths, and the Olympians were pushed aside, yet they did not vanish. Their faces became allegories, their myths became poetry, their temples became ruins, where wanderers paused in awe. In silence they endured, their whispers hidden not in rituals but in art, in stories retold by poets, in stones carved with faded inscriptions. The silence carried also the voices of forgotten cults, half buried in time. The Eleusinian mysteries, once the heart of Demeter's worship, kept their secrets even as the rites ceased, their initiates' vows of silence never broken. Orphic songs, scattered on tablets, still murmur of death and rebirth, of Dionysus torn and remade. In remote valleys, Pan's name lingers in echoes of pipes, the sudden terror of empty places. Artemis remains in the silver face of the moon, even when her temples are dust. Apollo shines in the sun, though no priestess utters his riddles. The gods withdrew from marble and altar, but not from the world. They live on in symbols, in shadows, in the whispers of memory. For every ruin holds a voice. The broken columns of Delphi still murmur of prophecies once spoken. The stones warm beneath the sun as though Apollo himself lingers. The olive groves of Attica still recall Athena's gift, leaves rustling with her wisdom. The waves breaking on Cape Sunion still flash with Poseidon's power, his temple standing watch in fragments of marble against the endless sea. The dark caves of Crete still hum with the secret of Zeus's birth. The clang of curetes faint in the imagination. The gods may no longer walk openly, but their presence is folded into the land, into the earth itself, inseparable from the soil of Greece. And in the minds of mortals, too, they remain. Artists painted their faces anew in frescoes and mosaics. Poets retold their stories, weaving them into epics and tragedies long after temples closed. Philosophers pondered their symbols, seeing in them allegories of truth, order, chaos, and beauty. Even when faith turned to new heavens, the names of Zeus, Hera, Apollo, Artemis, Athena, Dionysus lingered in the mouths of those who loved stories, who found in myth a mirror of the human soul. In silence, the gods did not die. They transformed into memory, into art, into language itself. For the truth of the gods was never only in temples or sacrifices. It was in the way mortals saw the world. Thunder as Zeus's voice, grain as Demeter's gift, the sea as Poseidon's realm, the moon as Artemis's light. That vision cannot vanish, for the world still holds thunder, grain, sea, and moon. As long as these remain, so too do the whispers of the gods, whether named or unnamed, whether worshipped or remembered in story. The silence beyond Olympus is filled with echoes, and to listen is to hear them still. Perhaps the gods changed names, wearing new robes, taking on new guises, as mortals turn to new faiths. Perhaps they slipped into the fabric of the world, content to be felt rather than seen. Perhaps they remain, waiting, veiled in silence, until voices call upon them once more. Whatever their fate, their whispers endure. The silence beyond Olympus is not emptiness, it is the space where memory lives, where myth becomes eternal. And so, as the mountain darkens and the stars wheel above, the last whispers fade into stillness. The gods are no longer thunder in the sky or flame on the altar. They are softer now, carried in stone, in story, in song. They are remembered not as rulers but as echoes, their many names still rustling in the wind that sweeps the heights of Olympus. And in that silence, mortals may close their eyes and dream, hearing faintly the voices of Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, Apollo, Artemis, Athena, Dionysus, the shifting, many-named immortals who once strode the world and now linger as whispers beyond Olympus.